Good afternoon to those in Europe and in Turkey. Once again, we're discussing the Turkish elections. This time we have the results of the presidential elections that took place yesterday on May 28th. We would like to discuss the results, dissect some of the issues, discuss what happened, why the opposition coalition once again failed to succeed against President Erdogan. It might appear like a very obvious question to many, but it's at the same time can be a very puzzling question after 21 years amidst so much regional uncertainty and instability, Turkey being affected by a number of challenges, serious challenges, economic challenges, and then, a recent earthquake and other challenges, let's say terrorism and problems with the United States, problems with the West, etc. So there are many problems we could enumerate, but despite all of that, President Erdogan won with a comfortable margin. He won more than 52% of the votes. He actually, by numbers, he increased his votes from the first round, which was 27 million something, and I believe it was more than 27.5 million now. And what does this tell us about the future of the country for the next 5 years? President Erdogan, since 1994, has not lost an election at the municipal level or national level that he entered. It's no small feat, to say the least. It speaks to his, I guess, charisma, political skill, and he's become an invincible political figure in Turkish politics. And this obviously has serious implications for the future of the country, both in terms of domestic politics and international politics. So we would like to discuss these issues. We discussed pre-election expectations, polls, etc. last week. And once again, I want to, turn to Professor Duran, who is the general coordinator of SETA Foundation, and my colleague Kılıç Kanat, our research director here in Washington, D.C., will also comment on these issues. Professor Duran, what do you make of the results? What is your general reaction to the results? What happened yesterday?
Well, thank you, Kadir. I'm very grateful to this reality that Turkey has experienced a democratic election with peace and stability. And this is something that Turkish democracy has been consolidated to the level that Turkish people have chosen their president for the next 5 years. Of course, there are many lessons to be taken from these elections for the President Erdogan and also for the opposition. Yes, as analysts, we like to take some lessons, but I'm not sure about whether politicians could take these lessons seriously when the elections are over. But anyway, the first point is that you made President Erdogan has won his 16 or 17 elections. Actually, the first one was in 1994. He got the Istanbul municipality. And then starting from 2002 until the last elections, for 16 elections, President Erdogan won these elections consecutively. There was no interruption. That is something never happened in Turkish history, Turkish democratic history. And also, I have this opinion that we cannot find a similar one even in other democratic countries. Why this is so? Of course, President Erdogan is a unique politician that is very capable of winning elections. And some people would call him as the Superman for winning these elections. He's very capable of doing this. But at the same time, of course, there are some issues, challenging issues in front of Turkey, just starting by economic problems to other issues. But at the same time, we should be aware of this reality that Kılıçdaroğlu got 48% of the votes. It means that opposition was powerful enough to balance this President Erdogan's victory at some margins. Yes, there are 4% difference, but still, especially in metropolitan areas in Istanbul and Ankara, Kılıçdaroğlu was ahead of Erdogan for 30%. It means that the opposition was defeated. Erdogan has won the elections, but the opposition still can feel themselves that we can be successful in the coming municipality local elections that will be realized just after 10 months later, and this will make them something work together as the nation's alliance. Because there were some discussions over the future of the opposition that if there was a defeat, Kılıçdaroğlu will resign and the nation's alliance will be, torn apart. Well, I don't think so, because Kılıçdaroğlu took 48%, and opposition is now taking some extra percent in Istanbul and Ankara. This means that they need each other, and they will try to make, again, a united front against President Erdogan for the coming local elections. And actually, there will be some criticism within the opposition circles towards Kılıçdaroğlu, because the leader of the Good Party Akşener was right in telling that, Kılıçdaroğlu cannot win against Erdogan. But still, this is something in the past. And looking for the future, I believe that Akşener can make some new negotiations within the alliance and can be very effective in such dealings with CHP, with Kılıçdaroğlu, because she saw that this small rightist parties took some 37 members PM from CHP. So this will empower her, but at the same time, this reality of local elections will lead to, I think, to still continuation of the nation's alliance. And Kılıçdaroğlu also is very capable of keeping his party together, and he has the delegates, and he can still continue as the leader of the CHP. So this is the new balance for the Turkish politics, of course. But President Erdogan has now 5 years to implement his policies that are promised in the election campaigns, and also seeing this victory on the side of Anatolian cities, especially Anatolian cities. Still, this is the continuation of his political career and his series of victories against the opposition. So all of them are directing Turkey to have a stable 5-year to be powerful, to be effective in foreign policy issues. And Erdogan is a very effective leader in even dealing with the war in Ukraine, making this grain deal possible, grain corridor possible. And I think he will continue to take this economy, energy, and diplomacy issues together, and to be much more seen at the level of diplomacy. And in the last election campaigns, in the last 3 and 4 months, President Erdogan was so much domestically oriented. And when you look at his speech at the balcony, he said that we will continue to work for the elections, for the local elections, and we will get Istanbul and Ankara back. He implied that his party will get Istanbul and Ankara back. Well, this is a challenging position, is a challenging goal, because AK Party and his allies as People's Alliance should work much more than before to get back from Istanbul and Ankara, from İmamoğlu and Yavaş. But still, Turkey is, in terms of politics, will be very vibrant, very debatable, because we cannot say that elections are over. Still, there is another election is coming, and we will continue to talk about politics and politics. And something is very understandable. You said that in such a polarized and divided country, well, yes, in terms of politics, I mean, whether you are supporting Erdogan or Kılıçdaroğlu, it seems that there is a division, even polarization. But in terms of political tendencies, you will see that conservative or nationalist parties or politicians are at the same time in both sides. So this is something as centrifugal, and it is something promising for Turkish politics. And I believe that this polarization in the last election was about the Erdogan factor. I mean, he's so successful that even some conservative parties, nationalist parties, were against him, and this made possible for Kılıçdaroğlu to bring all opposition parties together. And at the same time, we realize that presidential system is getting consolidated in Turkey, and the option of transition to parliamentary system is gone. And now we will see further consolidation of the presidential system under the presidency of President Erdogan for the next 5 years. But at the same time, you have seen at least 14 or 16 parties in the parliament, and this is very composed of different personalities, political personalities, that will discuss issues of the challenging issues of Turkey in the parliament. So something is very clear: politics will never die in Turkey and will be very vibrant.
Thank you, Professor Duran. Kılıç, last night, President Erdogan, during his speech, he did repeat some of the pre-campaign rhetoric, especially focused on Kılıçdaroğlu, the opposition leader, who has essentially never won any of the elections, that he entered as a party and for himself last night. But beyond that, President Erdogan talked about, the entire country winning, not just the 52%. And then he right away talked about the next elections, the municipal elections, like Professor Duran mentioned. So there is a seriousness about continuing the political work, and we're going to see in the next 9-10 months the probably, once again, contentious or strong campaigns in the big cities, in Istanbul, Ankara, elsewhere. So when you look at that picture, and when you consider last night's speech by President Erdogan, what made him successful, and what do you foresee for the next year, but also next 5 years?
Thank you very much, Kadir. And I think when we have our last panel on Friday, just before the elections, as many analysts, we have predicted that the result would be, according to polls and according to our research here, it would be between 51 to 53%. And that was the result, actually. After 7 p.m., the numbers were literally for Erdogan. Erdogan was never under 50%. It was always between 51 and 53%. So it was a predicted success. What was significant for Erdogan, and what was missed by the opposition is important, I guess. And since the beginning of the elections, we have said that opposition, 6 parties, together with the support of HDP and then Victory Party, 8 parties support, they establish a common, a shared kind of agenda maybe, but there wasn't any shared vision. The only agenda was to defeat Erdogan in the election. And there was a lot of confusion among the voters about the decision-making process of this structure that they established, especially after they said that there will be 6 or 7 vice presidents. And all of the decisions needs to be approved by these 6 vice presidents. And the real challenging issue was these 5 of these 7 actually vice presidents are from different parties, and they have different agendas and they have different ideologies. So for the ordinary voters, especially for a country that was facing some economic challenges, that was facing a lot of geopolitical challenges in its south as a result of the Syrian war, in its north as a result of the Ukraine war, and its east as a result of Iranian crisis of Iran with other members of international community and its crisis in the Middle East. There was a lot of uncertainties, and to have a leader with a very vague decision-making process was very difficult to understand for the ordinary voters in Turkey. And since the beginning of their campaign, there were a lot of questions on the ground, even on the TV shows. Talking heads a lot of time raised this issue of decision-making, but they never answered. So in regards to especially very critical issues like war on terror, especially the PKK issue, the economic management, there was not certainty who will run the economic affairs, who will run the security affairs, and how they are going to do it. Especially in the last 2 weeks of the campaign, this campaign after the first round of elections, I think opposition wasted a lot of time to try to convince voters by providing them individual promises, like making districts city, increasing wages, basically pardoning all the credit card debts and things like that. These are these may sound very populist and very popular policies, but there needs to be a plan at least to explain the voters how to achieve that. Sending 3 million Syrians to Syria. That was one of the promises in 1 year period. And it wasn't clear how they are going to do it, what will be the process. AK Party has its own plan. President Erdogan multiple times stated that the Syrian refugees will go back voluntarily when there is enough reconstruction and rebuilding of the cities in Syria, right?
If I may interrupt very briefly, there was actually, you know, the people had a hard time believing it, partly also because they were claiming there were 10 million, 13 million refugees, right?
Yeah, all of those, you know, like the pardoning credit card debts. And this didn't, this may sound a very, you know, like you may think that it's a very popular policy, but it generated a lot of question about ordinary citizens, those who never used their credit cards, or, you know, that's one of the questions. Number one, how are you going to pay them off and pardon them? And number two is why there will be why this is the decision to lower the interest rate or to pardon interest rate is something different. So it was a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions about the real agenda of the opposition. And it turns out that the last 2 weeks, the opposition literally cherry pick all of the ideas, all of the things that they would think will bring a pocket of voting bloc to the opposition. It turns out that this is not a very correct vision, at least relevant vision to win the elections. I think the big plus for Erdogan was Erdogan provided this great Turkey discourse and vision. And for many voters, actually, it was important to provide a comprehensive agenda for dealing with some of the crisis was important. And the same thing with the opposition, one of the most important things was earthquake reconstruction and promising that all of the houses will be free. So those were very difficult to explain to the ordinary voters. I think it was the main, for the last 2 weeks, that was the main thing. Of course, there was a lot of silent division within the opposition that wasn't put on record, but that could be understood from the reactions. For example, after the elections for 1 week, almost 1 week, Meral Akşener was nowhere to be seen. And other small parties that is part of the sixth coalition bloc mainly focused on their parliamentary groups instead of supporting Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. So there was a lot of questions about where are the two mayors who were very much upfront in the first electoral campaign. So there was a lot of question marks, and there was a lot of these silent divisions that probably crippled some of the energies of the opposition voters. And the lack of a strategy for the second round of for the opposition generated a huge disappointment, because they, I think, put the threshold and the expectation is so high that many of the opposition voters were expecting a swift victory in the first round of the elections. So when it didn't come, and when he was almost 3 million behind Erdogan's voters, it generated major disappointment. And there wasn't any plan to remobilize and remotivate the opposition voters to go to polls. I think it is important to say a few words about the turnout. In the first election, it was the first round, it was almost 89%. Correct me if I'm wrong. Now it is around 85%. So at approximately 3% lost, 3% of the Turkish voters that vote for the first round didn't go to election in the second round. And it might be that those are some of the opposition voters as well. So this is, of course, a major electoral victory for Erdogan. And you enumerate how many elections he won. I think, was it 16th or something, local elections, referendum, presidential elections, parliamentary elections. And he demonstrated that he's a very astute politician and very difficult to be defeated in the elections. I think the idea, at least a year ago, among most of the opposition was whoever is the candidate, regardless of his identity, regardless of his agenda, or regardless of his political skills, he could defeat Erdogan in the ballot, because there are so many different issues that Turkey has to deal with, and Erdogan lost his popularity. But it turns out to be wrong. So to pick a candidate that is basically that would have a hard time to mobilize voters was, I think, a wrong idea. And local elections from now on, probably there will be a month break for the politics in Turkey, because the new government will be formed. There will be an oath for office, and probably there will be a short vacation for the next couple of weeks. But immediately after that, we will see a major election campaign for the municipalities. And actually, when I see the tweets from both the mayor of Ankara and mayor of Istanbul last night, I can see that they started their campaign, because their first word was, well, congratulations to President Erdogan. We are now back on our jobs in Ankara and Istanbul. Probably one of the most significant results of this election was there is two candidates, how they were brought to be the vice presidential candidates and how they were, their bloc is defeated. And they got probably for their charisma, a major damage to their charisma as well as a result of this defeat, especially after the first round of elections when they claimed that Kılıçdaroğlu was, we are not sure what happened, but probably they were misinformed. When they claimed that Kılıçdaroğlu was leading in the polls, which actually didn't happen at that point, probably their charisma and their kind of ability to convince voters about these things were significantly challenged. And especially for Istanbul and Ankara, in the next couple of months, probably AK Party will try to find a new candidate to defeat those, not only Istanbul, Ankara, Antalya and Adana as well, the 4 cities. And after that, they'll probably be, party will be working in those 4 cities and in other cities in Turkey for the local elections. But for the government, of course, there will be different priorities. President Erdogan last night in his victory speech mentioned that there will be a new team in the economics. So we will be expecting new policies, probably that part of them will be the continuation of Erdogan's policies, but part of them can be new innovative policies in economics. And in foreign policy, since the earthquake, probably President Erdogan didn't, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't make any foreign visits. And today there will be a phone call between Biden and Erdogan, which we can talk later. So the foreign policy agenda will continue to be high on the priorities of the government.
Before moving on to foreign policy, I just have a question. Professor Duran, the conventional wisdom says, the Kurdish vote becomes the kingmaker in Turkey. And we saw that between the first round and the second round, because of Kılıçdaroğlu's moves, the protocol he signed with Ümit Özdağ, the Victory Party leader, that may have cost them a lot of votes from the Kurdish region especially. And that may have been the case in Istanbul as well, because Istanbul is the largest Kurdish city as well. Do you think we should question that Kurdish vote is the kingmaker kind of wisdom? That's the conventional wisdom we keep hearing about. But somehow, in this election, it wasn't enough to bring down Erdogan. So what is your perspective on that?
Well, you're right in telling that Kurdish voters are very significant in all of these discussions over the power and over the opposition. But I think, who is the kingmaker? This question is so much problematic in Turkish politics, because in the first round, yes, HDP supported Kılıçdaroğlu very openly and very energetically. But the third candidate, Sinan Ogan, got 5% of votes, and these voters were nationalists, Turkish nationalists, and some protesters against Syrian refugees. So at the same time, in the parliament, HDP was not able to control the balance of the majority. Without HDP, the People's Alliance could control the majority of the parliament. So it means that HDP is not a key to the parliament, to the politics of the parliament. And at the same time, Kılıçdaroğlu's move to Turkish nationalism in the second round, created some resentment on the side of Kurdish voters. If you look at the southeastern cities, you will see that Kılıçdaroğlu lost from 5 to 7, even 8%. And at the same time, President Erdogan got some extra votes maybe that's not at the level of that Kılıçdaroğlu has lost, but still there was a change in the voting. Well, this means that Kurdish voters are disillusioned with Kılıçdaroğlu's sudden and easy shift to Turkish nationalist discourse, because CHP's past is full of some problematic policies, criticized policies towards the Kurdish question. So this reminded people that in spite of HDP is still supporting Kılıçdaroğlu, there is a suspicion that Kılıçdaroğlu could not keep the promise that was given to HDP. So in overall evaluation, still Kılıçdaroğlu was very ahead of President Erdogan in these cities. But for Turkish politics, in the next 5 years, I can say that Kurdish voters are not the kingmaker. Actually, Turkish nationalist parties and politicians would be much more effective. And that's why when today in Turkey, we are discussing the necessity of finding a solution to this problem of Syrian refugees, because people are paying enough attention to that. And I expect that in the local elections, this issue of Syrian refugees, return of refugees to their countries, could be a very significant issue. And this, again, could be raised by the nationalist parties again in the elections, in the campaign of elections. But at the same time, I should add to that, Kılıçdaroğlu couldn't voice enough policies to make people sure that he will struggle with the PKK terror. And Akşener, the leader of the Good Party, would question Kılıçdaroğlu's policies and at the same time, actually his decision to be the candidate. If you look at the last 3 presidential elections in 2014, 2018, and 2023, you will see that President Erdogan got 52, and the opposition, who is, that doesn't make any sense, who is the opposition candidate, they took 48%. So this means that in spite of 21 year experience, and it's, of course, it's such a burden on the politicians at the same time, Erdogan could get the same result. But at the same time, it means that Kılıçdaroğlu couldn't create a difference, couldn't make a difference in the politics.
Professor Duran, you just stole my question to Kılıç. This is exactly what I wanted to ask him.
Okay, I will stop here.
No, you can go ahead.
Go ahead, finish your thoughts.
Well, this is the main weakness and strength of Kılıçdaroğlu. He was able to unite the opposition against Erdogan, but we know that this is the capital of all the opposition leaders and parties. So it's not difficult to bring them together, but that's not enough for the success. But at the same time, your ability to bring them makes you still the leader of the opposition party. So, you know, that's a trap for the opposition, I think.
Thank you, Professor Duran. The reason I said he stole my question, Kılıç, is that, 2018, it was the same result, 52%. Regardless of the combination of the opposition, there seems to be a limit. Does that mean that the opposition is kind of condemned to this maximum of 48%? And what do you think they need to think long and hard about what to do? Because last night we saw that Kılıçdaroğlu, the main opposition party leader, showed no signs of major sort of reckoning or resignation. A lot of people expected him to resign because he's, 74, or at least give some indication to that effect. We didn't see that. And like Professor Duran explained, that ceiling seems unbreakable, especially when Erdogan is running. So what can you tell us about the future of the opposition in that sense?
I think there are, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, there are a lot of uncertainties about what the opposition is going to do after this. Probably there will be the coalition that they formed will continue up until the local elections, because the victory, as I told you in my previous panel, the winning an election or getting an electoral result was the main mobilizer of this opposition. That was something that keeps the opposition united, because they experienced in 2018. In 2018, although President Erdogan won the election, they considered the fact that E Party got 10% and got into parliament a major victory for themselves. So what started this process was immediately after the 2018 elections, when they see the result, they decided to repeat it in local elections. And they were able to get the mayoral elections in major cities in Istanbul, Ankara, Antalya, and Adana. And when they see this, they thought that it will. They had to continue this in 2023 elections, and now they were defeated. So the question mark is: are they going to continue this coalition? And today, for example, Istanbul's mayor made an announcement saying that the change is very important. The only thing that wouldn't change is change itself. So signaling probably some changes in his attitude, probably some changes within CHP. There are a lot of questions about what he's going to do. But for the opposition, the mayoral elections now, especially for the bloc, is an existential election. So if they lost this election, probably, and if they lost those major cities, we will not see any opposition bloc probably for the long run. Yesterday, Meral Akşener's statements was very balanced at certain point, but she also insinuated that she knew about this because she was against Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu's candidacy for a long period of time. And she mentioned that, and she kept saying she didn't name Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu at all at the beginning, but she said, we have to come up with a candidate who can defeat Erdogan. And that meant Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu is not that candidate. And she continued this attitude up until the last point. Later, she was convinced, or she was brought back to the coalition, but she never, actually, for the many opposition analysts, she didn't spend enough effort for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. And that was the result. And when we compare the election result for the other elections, I think there were some expectations and some wishful thinking among the opposition that turned out to be, we will see the detailed results, but that may be wrong. Because for the opposition, the most important thing was the young voters. And they were expecting that almost 5 million plus young voters, approximately 5 million young voters will go and vote for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. And 5 million young voters means almost...
Actually, new voters, right?
New voters. Young voters mean those voters who will vote for the first time in the elections. And this is almost 10%. And they were expecting that a very predominant majority of these young people go and vote for the opposition. And because of that, they were expecting, without much effort and without much thinking on the strategy or the candidate, they were expecting an easy win in the first round of the elections. And it turns out to be wrong. So comparing with 2018 or previous presidential elections, we see that it is more or less same. Of course, between 2018 and 2023 now, two elections, there are two splinter parties, right, from AK Party, former Prime Minister Davutoğlu and former Deputy Prime Minister Babacan formed their own parties and joined the opposition. And on top of that, we have 5 million new voters. And when we look at the results, Erdogan didn't lose much. And it is partly Erdogan's success and ability to keep its own coalition together. And when we look at the numbers, if 5 or 6 million voters were added since 2018 voters, not only keeping his coalition united, but also bringing new voters to this coalition to continue to keep more than 50% of the votes. I think that was the most significant thing. And there are now a lot of uncertainties in the opposition, not only as a bloc. We are not even sure what they're going to do, how they're going to act in the parliament. Now we know that some of the small parties like Gelecek and Saadet are trying to form a group in the parliament. And we are not sure which policies they will support. And if their policies, if their line will continue to be in the line of CHP and Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu.
Thank you both for this in-depth discussion about the ruling party and the opposition dynamics. I would like to move to foreign policy, and we already have questions about that. One question is about Syria. Professor Duran, there have been some meetings in Moscow. I believe at least 3 meetings took place between intel chiefs and defense ministers between Syria and Turkey. And the question from the audience says, is Erdogan now more free to cut a deal with Assad, which would lead to a pull-out of Turkish troops in Syria in return for the repatriation of the Syrian refugees?
Well, yeah, good question. When it comes to Syria, Turkish perspective is actually related to two issues. One is the struggle with PKK and YPG terrorist group, and the second one is the Syrian refugee issue. Maybe you may add this to also the opposition. Well, I think this is very connected to Syrian refugee issue. Turkey is trying to normalize relations with the Assad regime. This is certain. But if you withdraw your troops from Syria without solving this refugee crisis, which I think necessitates a kind of integration of the opposition into the system, then you will face more problems. You will not solve your refugee problem. You will even make it bigger, because there are 4 or 5 million Syrian refugees living under the Turkey's somehow control in the northern Syria. In Idlib also there is another organization, but Turkey's position there keeps the stability, and it means that 4 and 5 million Syrians are living there. If you add 3.6 million Syrian in Turkey, it means that 8 to 9 million Syrian people are somehow controlled by Turkey. So it means that you will have a peace deal, you will have an agreement with Assad on the condition that these people will go back. But I'm not sure about whether Assad is ready to do that, because these people also are opposing the Assad regime. And these Sunni Syrian groups are opposing the Assad regime. So there should be more and more discussions on that, and some new mechanisms and agreements. And I think that this will take more time if you compare with the other normalization processes with Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the Emiratis. It is very important to see that what will be the position of the US. Now we know that Assad regime is back to Arab League, and this is a normalization process with Arab countries. But again, what is the meaning of this? Refugee issue and drug trafficking are two conditions on the Syrian regime. But again, I am not sure about whether Syrian regime would be consistent in dealing with this drug and refugee issues. So it is positive to see this normalization with Assad, but I believe that there are more and there is a long way to go to withdraw Turkish troops and solve this refugee crisis. An easy answer: without the return of the Syrian refugees, Turkish troops will continue to be there.
Thank you, Professor Duran. Kılıç, earlier you mentioned Professor Duran discussed Syria and some of the opening efforts, Turkish efforts towards the Middle East. Let's talk about the United States, relations with the United States, Kılıç. We saw yesterday there was literally outpouring of statements of congratulations. President Sarkozy even did it in Turkish over Twitter. President Biden sent out a message. Blinken did. Many other leaders from the Middle East, Azerbaijan, Qatar, etc. So there was a big sort of outpouring of congratulations to President Erdogan. So how did you read those tweets by the U.S. President and the Secretary of State Blinken, and what do you expect in the next few weeks and few months in terms of U.S.-Turkey relations?
I think it's a good sign that the first tweets, and today probably they will have a phone call. There were reports about that they will have a phone call today in the evening hours of Turkey, in a couple of hours actually. If that happens, that's a very good sign, because as you may recall, when Biden became president, it took him 3 months to call Turkey. I think it was April. I vaguely remember, but it was April 20th or something like that, to basically have a phone call. And this quick tweet from Blinken and Biden and the phone call, if it happens today, these are good signs. However, Turkish-American relations have very challenging 10 years, and it was in part as a result of the Syrian war and the US support for YPG, which we have seen in this election, how significant that issue is for Turkish people, both Syria issue and YPG issue itself, and its relations with PKK. These are very significant issues for Turkish people. And F-16 issue, which had been waiting and which moved very slowly, despite multiple different statements by President Biden to support this. The last one was, it was last NATO meeting in Madrid last year. The process is moving really slowly, and I think there are important challenges for them, and these questions need to be resolved. And also several crises, including the war in Ukraine. Those are the issues that they need to talk, to cooperate or to coordinate their policies. And especially in Biden's statement, the NATO membership and NATO umbrella was a significant emphasis for NATO umbrella, and that was important. So today's phone call is a very good first step. It's better than when Biden is elected. So this is real good, but the relations come to a point that, it should, when I say that it's a good news, it should show how low the expectations to resolve the problems between those two countries. So this is bad. And if United States is willing to make a fresh start with Erdogan in this new Erdogan government, for 5 years now, Erdogan will be the president of Turkey. This is a good place to start. And if they can establish a working relationship from now on. We know that President Erdogan values presidential foreign policy and diplomacy a lot. So if they can establish a working relationship from now on, if they can manage to set a time to meet and discuss those significant issues, to resolve them, not to, like the prepared strategic dialogue groups or things which we have seen that didn't bring any major difference in the relations. So if Biden and President Erdogan, which next month, it is the month after next month, actually is NATO summit, but both for the NATO summit. And then if they have a bilateral summit to resolve those issues, I think then we can say that, okay, the phone call and the congratulatory messages was really good steps, but now we have to, and now they are sitting together to resolve those problems. And I think in a region with so many geopolitical uncertainties, so many political instabilities, Turkey's position is extremely important for the geopolitics of Central Asia, especially after Turkey's recent diplomatic moves in Central Asia, to crisis in Ukraine because of the Turkey's grain deal and Turkey's attempt to facilitate a conversation between Ukrainians and Russians, and also to the different crises in the Middle East. I think having Turkey on and to be able to cooperate and coordinate policies with Turkey will be important for the US foreign policy as well.
Thank you, Kılıç. Professor Duran, when I was asking my question to Kılıç, I apparently said President Sarkozy, but I should have said Macron. I don't know if it's I'm recalling old Europe in that sense.
Nobody picked that up. Don't worry, Kadir.
Well, my assistant did, so maybe that's a good segue into discussing Europe's EU's approach to Turkey. It's been very problematic. Actually, one question is now about Swedish entry into NATO, and the question is a trade-off of the F-16s for Swedish entry into NATO possible? Question mark. So please answer that question, but also more broadly, how do you expect relations with the European countries are going to be? And we'll end the session after your response. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kadir. Well, maybe I should answer your first question at last. Well, it is positive to see very quick congratulations from the Western leaders to President Erdogan. And I think this could provide a positive atmosphere for reviving the bilateral relations and strengthening the relations within the alliance, within the NATO alliance, especially in such a time of difficulties for the European security system. As you know, President Erdogan is very energetic and very effective in these diplomatic affairs, especially when it comes to there is a necessity of persuading President Putin. So I think Turkey is a part of the European security system. President Erdogan may contribute to some issues for the European leaders' agenda, for their agenda. But something should be realized that Turkey is a new Turkey. What do I mean by that? President Erdogan has a term of 5 years, a period of 5 years. And sometimes Western capitals would call President Erdogan as something tough to be negotiating. But it is at the same time true that Turkey is considering its national interests first, but this is not against the NATO alliance or this is not against the European Union. If this results of elections are taken as something to revive the relations, then it's okay. President Macron said that for the European security and in the Mediterranean, yeah, there could be some cooperation, especially when there is a low tension, lowering the tension between Turkey and Greece. This is an opportunity to make it again. But this should be based on the mutual interests, not on imposing something on Turkey. And this is very clear that Turkey will not give up such kind of European or US imposition on her interests. That is very crystal clear. President Erdogan showed this reality many times. While coming back to F-16 issue, as far as I know, the Turkish government is against this trade-off. There is no relationship between F-16 and Sweden's entry into NATO, and no need for giving F-16 for the entry of Sweden. I mean, they can do this very easily if they comply with the protocol signed by two countries, as Finland did, and it is the easiest way to ensure Turkey that there will be no protection of terrorist groups in Sweden. Well, connecting this to F-16 issue makes Turkey's relations within NATO and with US much more problematic than before, and this is not helping. You know, in the past there was an obstacle of S-400 in bettering the relations between Turkey and the US, and now this should not be Sweden's entry into NATO.
And before that, it was Pastor Brunson issue. So I want to add one thing. I think when I kind of see the Turkish approach to its relations with the US, I think there are certain things that US administration has to deal with, and that is the anti-Turkey attitude among some members of the Congress. And if these conditionalities about defense industry cooperation that comes for the last 20 years in multiple different instances, first for the Predators, then for the Patriot missiles, then for F-35, then for F-16, there's constant opposition in the Congress to sell these weapons to Turkey. And in each and every time, the relations got into turbulence and crisis as a result of those impediments for weapon sales. I think, and that happened earlier in the history as well. There was once in 1970s an arms embargo for Turkey. And this is the responsibility of the US administration to convince the members of the Congress about the strategic significance of Turkey and its importance for the national security of the United States, especially in regards to the affairs in the Middle East. And it turns out that some members of the Congress can be very creative in generating new conditionalities when on the table there is a weapon sales to Turkey. I think Turkey, and think about this, President Erdogan met with 5 different presidents: George Bush, President Obama, President Trump, and President Biden, four different presidents. And these presidents, in some instances, basically brought as congressional conditionalities when Turkey wanted to buy some weapons. And I think the institutional memory of Turkish presidency and President Erdogan will not allow Turkey to accept any new condition for F-16 or any kind of weapon that Turkey wants to buy from the United States, if two administrations, of course, agree on the transaction.
Thank you, Kılıç. Thank you, Hocam, Professor Duran. So we are going to end this session here, but as you commented, your last comments about the foreign policy, especially in terms of relations with the United States and with the West in general, we hope that there will be a new era now that President Erdogan has another mandate for the next 5 years, and there are really burning issues throughout the regions around Turkey, including, war in Ukraine and Middle East issues and Eastern Mediterranean as well. So we will definitely continue to discuss these issues in the weeks and months ahead. And right after the we know the composition of the new Turkish government, when the ministers are appointed, we will discuss what lies ahead for Turkey as well. Thank you all for joining us on Zoom, on social media as well. Thank you to both of you again.
Thank you. Have a nice day.